We cleaned this seat thoroughly already, and I'm going to repair this little hole. For this first repair, I'm going to use a heat gun. For a larger repair, I will use a heat iron, which is right now warming up. Whenever I have a repair that's big enough to get fingers in, you have to put some support underneath it for a couple of reasons. Number one, it's going to come out a lot better, be a lot less noticeable if it's got support underneath it. One of the reasons for that is when you're heating vinyl, it stretches. I also want to protect the foam that's exposed here. So what I do is I just get a soft piece of cardboard. Sometimes a thick scrap vinyl will work as well. I just roll it over my finger and slide it in there and through the hole, and I leave it in there. This is especially helpful on a part of the seat that might not have firm backing, like a seat back that has a void between the cover and the foam. You've got to figure out a way to firm that up before you do your repair. I can't say enough about how it affects the outcome. I'm going to use some scrap vinyl material that's thin but strong. In this case, I always cut it bigger than the hole. And I usually round the edges off to make sure that when I put it in, again, I just roll it over my finger, slide it in there, and make sure that it lies flat. I'm going to use a liquid vinyl repair compound that only hardens with heat. So what I'm trying to do here is wet the edges of the cut, fill in where any vinyl is missing, and I'm deliberately not putting it underneath where the heat doesn't get to it. That's important. Just be conservative here. Use a small amount. Wet the edges of the cut. Now I'm going to leave a little bit on my palette knife on purpose, because I'm going to take my patching material, which we call a fiberglass mesh. I'm going to make it slightly bigger than the cut I'm repairing. And I'm going to stick it on the back of my palette knife. I'll start out with my heat gun on a higher setting, warm the area a little bit. Remember, when you heat vinyl, it stretches, it expands. So I'm going to get my heat gun right down on top of it, back off, heat it some more, back off. Now I'm going to drop it to a lower setting, heat it some more. What I'm trying to do is heat it in stages so that heat sinks all the way through the seat cover to the patch I put in there. Now I have my mesh and I'm going to press it right onto that, trying to push it into the melted vinyl, heat it a little more, press again. What I'm using here is called a cooling bar. It does help cool the surface, but it also helps level it. I'm trying to get that fiberglass reinforcement melted down smooth into the seat cover. Then I take, again, thin layers of the repair compound. And when I spread the compound, I don't spread out, I spread in on purpose because I want to keep the repair areas small. So I kind of feather it in rather than feather it out. And I'll heat it in the same way. Back off, let the heat sink down into it, heat it again, back off. Usually the third time is good. One of the reasons that I heat that way is that if you just hold that heat gun on non-stop, you're burning the surface and the heat's not getting down underneath, melting to that support patch underneath. So now I have fairly smooth, but I'm going to do one more thin layer. And cool it again. So here's where I'm going to use my rubber mold, my texture pad I made off the seat to stamp the grain in. But first I'm going to use my heat compound in color. It's also called top coat. I only use it for the very last layer. A little bit goes a long way. It can also be brush applied. And I'll use the same format in heating it. What I'm looking for here is this compound, as it's curing, it looks wet as it's melting. It gives off a little bit of smoke, which means it's fusing, it's not burning. And I'll heat past that smoke and then immediately stamp the grain on. Takes an immediate impression, just like a rubber stamp. You just hit it once. So I fuse the grain in there. I think I'm going to grain a little more here. Now, if I didn't have that patch underneath and I'm trying to push the grain in, I would just be deliberately stretching the seat and it would have a pucker mark that I might have a hard time getting rid of. The only thing to do here to blend this further would be just a quick shot of spray paint over it, which is optional at this point. I could just as easily condition that seat with a non-silicone product and hide that repair.